Hey folks, so I thought I'd make a quick little video. Don't mind the beeping sound, that's actually my smoke detector, which I cannot reach because it's way too high and I don't have a ladder that's that high. So I've had to deal with that for a couple of weeks, maybe months. Um, anyway, I wanted to make a video before I have to head over to work describing some of the things that I've been working on as of late. And instead of just giving you a summary of everything, I'm just going to say where I'm coming from and then some of the really interesting ideas, for me personally, really interesting ideas that I've come across or reflected upon. So I'm coming from a study or a academic assumption that the best way of understanding any particular field or inquiry or especially as far as cultural studies go, a cultural transformation such as the internet age and the digital age and so forth, the best way to understand that is a multidisciplinary perspective. And beyond that, beyond having multiple disciplines, which is one thing, we also have to have a qualitative experience of shifting out of one dimension of mind to another. And that might be a fancy way of just saying, in addition to rationality, in addition to scholarship and intellectual, really just using the intellect and using the discerning mind, we have other faculties of mind, other dimensions and qualities of mind that are more imaginative and artistic and poetic, and those too can be brought into scholarship. And so I think a balance of both the science and the art, the imagination and the logic, are very important, and often enough are demonstrated in good science. In good science, there's often a very good play of imagination, and sometimes theories are spontaneous conjunctions of all these different ideas in the imagination that is later proved and demonstrated. So that's just my bias or where I'm coming from. So when I'm taking a look at specifically digital technology and trying to understand it, I try to incorporate things from like cultural evolution, cultural studies, mythology, mysticism, spirituality, art, and so forth. And what we've been seeing in this century, from what I gather, is the gradual, or perhaps not so gradual if you look at it from a historical perspective, and systemic breakdown of Western civilization. Culturally, with first the development of relativity and quantum physics and so forth, and then in addition the breakdown through postmodernism and the new forms of art and surrealism that throw us back into an irrational kind of consciousness and literally melt the rational Newtonian clock. And so, as in Dali's painting, so we have this breakdown of rational consciousness in this century. And the emergence of, hopefully, a more dynamic and complex consciousness. But one of the most interesting things that I've been recognizing about the internet, and specifically digital technologies, other than the fact that they're swarming all around us, and what Kevin Kelly, I call him a techno-philosopher, describes as the technium, which is like the sum total, or the emergent force that's greater than its parts of technology, that has almost a life of its own and is reproducing itself now beyond human control. This is at least what he believes. We're getting to the point where the technology is immersing us in an ecosystem of gears and gadgets and so forth. But rather than this being a mechanical metaphor, one of the things that I've raised in my study is that a more appropriate description for these technologies as a whole is more organic. And many people are already saying this about the internet. The internet is decentralized, it's networked, it's rhizomatic. And there's a lot of organic metaphors that are aptly put in trying to describe digital technologies. And so I began to make a few connections between what some people were saying about the degradation of the Western intellectual, the loss of the individual, and the return of the collective, which the internet seems to be, according to some theorists, seems to be imposing upon us and influencing us. And I began to look at some of the criticisms of how they say that we're losing our intellectual capacity, we're losing our abilities to sustain attention, and so forth. And certainly some of these things are very valuable, and especially coming from a Western civilization and a Western culture, these things are valuable. These things are markers of what it means to be an intelligent, individuated human being. And what the internet is doing and what the network age is doing is rewriting all of that, and is instead replacing some of these stable institutions such as the Encyclopedia Britannica and encyclopedias in general with things like Wikipedia, which don't appear to be stable or standing on any kind of stable ground at all, but are in complete flux and flow. And I began to realize that some of the criticisms towards the net have been particularly biased towards a Western rational intellectual conception of what it means to be an intelligent and orderly and functioning being in the universe. But the more I'm learning specifically about biology, the more I'm recognizing that this is not necessarily the case. That we're denigrating into this devolved and regressive state. Instead, I believe the metaphors in biology are telling us that nature is messy, nature is complicated, non-linear, at the edge of chaos in its order. If you ever study the brain and how it works with the millions and trillions, I think, of connections that are in the pathways of the brain, not only in the neurons, but the spaces between the neurons. I forget their names. I think dendrites and axons and so forth. So between the neurons, there's these like rhizomatic ecologies between neurons of all these different connections, and there's just millions upon billions of connections. And in the brain itself, there are enough connections. I think we have as many neurons as we do stars in the galaxy, and then the connections are more than the stars in the galaxy. So I mean, the brain is a completely, utterly complex organ that is staggeringly dynamic, and the kind of intelligence it exhibits and it demonstrates it's amazing. So I don't think we're really close to cracking that code. I think that is a couple of decades, maybe a century or 2 centuries off before we really begin to understand it. But I think certain breakthroughs that we're learning is that how the brain works is not in a linear, organized fashion. It's messier, it's more organic, and the order it produces appears to be chaos, but as I've been saying before, chaos is a higher form of order in nature. And the one thing that Western civilization really wasn't very good at was appreciating the other dynamic forms of order, which appear to be noise. And as the cultural theorist William Irwin Thompson describes, what appears as noise to one civilization and one culture becomes the meaningful sound and symbol of the next emerging culture. So what is noise to one group of people becomes information to the next. And so for Western civilization, what appears to be as noise is this messiness and this disorder and this wetness that nature seems to provide and to flourish in, which Enlightenment thinkers wish to dissect, pick apart, analyze, and impose a kind of orderly Newtonian and clockwork universe upon the world. So that is all going out the window, and I think the internet age and the digital age specifically, even though it's created by such a logical binary system, is creating the very opposite. It's creating an organic, networked, rhizomatic kind of society that does not function on the laws, ironically, of the very people who created it. It's a self-emergent process, it's a self-organizing process, and we're immersed in it. And all of that just goes to show that people who are using the internet are beginning to function more like our ancestors, in a virtual sense, not necessarily in a survival sense, but in a virtual sense, certain things are returning to us. For instance, first of all, online dating websites and the global village phenomenon, where people are knowing things about other people, and if you do something online, everybody knows about it. You do something offline, everybody knows about it online, and that sort of thing. It's returning to us a kind of not truly not at the same extent or qualitative level as perhaps our ancestors had because they were face to face, but it's returning the kind of global village where everybody knows a little bit about everybody else, um, and communication is more decentralized. Now, some might say, like John Ebert in his last book, New Media Invasion: Digital Technologies and the World They Unmake. One of the things that he mentions is these aren't necessarily enhancements of human communication; they're replacements, they're substitutes. Western civilization had done away with the village square. We created the family unit, the suburb, and we've disconnected people with automobiles and cars and roads. We've mechanized ourselves, and we've taken ourselves out of public circles and qualitative enjoyment with one another, actually speaking with one another and being in public places and learning to be social. And we've kind of shied away into our distinct family units. We've become more alienated from each other. And this wasn't the product of the internet. This was already present. So with the internet coming in, we're all chatting and communicating because this is a missing dimension of our experience. Now, one of the other functions that I think the net is doing is not just this sidereal replacement for real communication, a virtual replacement or substitution. It's being immersed or ingrained or interwoven into physical activities. People are actually getting together and doing stuff, like meetup.com or Yelp or any kind of augmented reality where you're on your iPhone and you're navigating the city. It's these sorts of things that I see the internet going towards, or digital technologies going towards, an integration with social activities. And social activities will probably never be the same again, but they will still be social. And they won't just be virtual as this is right now. This will be recorded for years, maybe decades. But odds are, in probably 10 to 15, maybe 20 years, the kind of communication that is virtual may be indistinguishable from physical. And these are very interesting questions, too, that raise other questions, whether or not this is a good thing, whether or not we're almost being placed in a kind of matrix in which we're missing out on reality, or if reality is being augmented and enhanced by these technologies. So, I mean, these are all philosophical questions that are very interesting, and I don't really have an answer for. But I do have one suggestion, and that is we've already done the alienating. We've already done the dehumanization with technology, and I would hope that the result or end product or the beginning of a new process with the internet is the rehumanization of ourselves through enhancements and augmentations. The cyborg is actually an enhancement of the human being because it lets us do what we've been good at all along, which is primarily, as like the media theorist Clay Shirky says, share and create and communicate. We're not just consumers. We like to create. We like to chat. We like to talk. We like to organize things. But it's very difficult to do that in a hierarchical and industrial society where you need money to do stuff. You need money to organize. You need a lot of red tape to get things done. With the internet, that's kind of getting out of the way. And now all of a sudden everybody can publish, everybody can blog, those sorts of things. They're not perfect. And because of everybody doing this stuff now, the quality of these things is no longer in the hands of the professional class. So we've lost a degree of quality, but we've gained an ecology in which you can go about the forest of information and videos, scouring YouTube, and you can find videos that you find to be interesting, and you can find quality things that you can pick off and consume and gather, these information gathering, this media gathering. So I love all of these metaphors, and I think there's something to them that we're being returned to, or innate or genetic or instinctual dispositions about human nature are being rediscovered through virtual means, because the virtual means are simply enabling us to be ourselves again. Just as the tools, such as the hammer, just as the basic primordial tools that humans developed were enhancements. They helped bring us back to, not back, but they helped bring us into ourselves, bring us into our humanity. Music brings us into ourselves. And if we can see technology as a creative and dynamic process which expresses ourselves and reveals who we are, then I hope we'll be able to avoid the dehumanizing aspects that um, technology does have. And let's say Douglas Rushkoff, who's another media theorist, is very concerned about. This stuff isn't just an autonomous process that's doing itself. People are designing the web. People are designing um, the programs that we go through and the commercials that play on YouTube. Um, all of those things have a degree of engineering in them. So we have to be careful of what's going on. We have to be knowledgeable of what's going on. Um, and luckily, one of the things that the internet does allow, at least allow for the potential for, is transparency. And that's just not just transparency for like socially on like Facebook, but the other way around. The very difficult transparency that governments are not happy about yet. Um, Government transparency and corporation transparency and internet activism and internet hacktivism and those sorts of things. This is a whole new landscape of dynamics and a whole new push-pull between the powers that be and the new decentralized and collectivized masses. And that leads me to the final point, I guess, for this before it gets too long, because this is basically like as long as a lecture. But as far as collectivization goes, what we're seeing with these digital technologies, and this is the mythical dimension that I love, is the return of what pre-modern societies had, which was a closed world cosmology. And we're not exactly the same, because we still have the Hubble Space Telescope. If that's still online, I don't know if that's still online, but we have equivalents of the Hubble Space Telescope that are peering into the infinite vastness of space, that are showing us the beauty and the awe and the sacredness of the cosmos again. At least for me, they really demonstrate the sacredness of the cosmos and how we're connected to these vast cosmic processes. But at the same time, the internet and the global communications technology is enveloping us into a sphere of communication, electromagnetic signals. The closed world of pre-modern society before the expansive and physical and waking world of modern civilization is hearkening us back to a dreamlike consciousness. Even the internet itself is a kind of a dreamlike experience where your mind is flowing through all these ideas and informations and images and sounds and so forth, and these phantasmic images that this isn't really me, this is like an avatar of me, and you're seeing my recording. So the internet is returning us to this pre-modern-like situation. And this ancient form of consciousness, this more dreamlike form of consciousness is returning. And then, as I mentioned before, the hunter-gatherer kind of consciousness where we're more egalitarian and collaborative and sharing and even things like dating websites where we know about the person before we meet them is hearkening us back to the behavior and lifestyle of hunter-gatherers and even the modern workforce. I read a very interesting article about the information economy, and it's from 1999, but it still applies probably more today. One of my friends is in the information economy. He's a blogger, which is an excellent, pretty interesting job, being able to blog for money. But all of these examples are demonstrating that we're behaving more like hunter-gatherers. We don't necessarily work hard all the time. We only work when it's necessary. We are constantly trying to search for information, and we're trying to be dynamic where we have to move with the information. We have to move with the hunt. And there's all these very interesting metaphors and analogies. And really personality-wise, the attitudes that hunter-gatherers have versus attitudes that groups of bloggers or I don't know what other types of jobs there are. I know people work with search engines and people work with other types of websites or coding and so forth. There's different dynamics in that lifestyle, and I think that's very interesting. So not only do we have the return of pre-modern dreamlike consciousness, but we seem to be having the return of an ecological, interconnected consciousness that is exhibited in not only the structure of the web, but the human experience using the web. And this isn't just for the information economy folks. This is for everybody. So we're all kind of hunter-gatherers in that sense, in a virtual sense. And no, we don't have necessarily a sense of the sacred like our ancestors did. neither the hunter-gatherer metaphors nor the pre-modern society, medieval dreamlike society, they're digital integrations or digital returns of things that used to be within people, used to be within us to believe in connection, to believe in interconnection. Except perhaps the hunter-gatherers, because they were physically in a different environment. They were physically in a natural, organic environment, as opposed to civilization. So I would say we are physically being put in a virtual, interconnected environment, and that is having an impact on our consciousness in ways that we don't all know about, in ways that I have no idea about, even beginning to study this, and in ways that will alter and change the way we think. And as Occupy Wall Street and the Arab Spring are demonstrating, there is a distinct and succinct expression of this in the way that protesters don't have any real goals. They have a general attitude. They function more like an ecology rather than some linear process of steps to get an end goal. And there's many other examples, and Douglas Rushkoff did a great article for CNN about this. So there's all these really interesting comparisons and metaphors for this ancient consciousness. And why is this happening? Why are we returning to this? This raises the larger questions that I will be getting into, especially for my graduate studies next semester. But shortly, I can simply say that there appears to be something about technology and about human nature that has never really escaped nature with a capital N. And although civilization appears to be the antithesis of nature, I believe, and many other scholars believe, that it's an extension of the natural universe. And there are certain convergent forces. There are certain convergent structures or patterns, and if you're a Jungian, you might call it archetypes. I'm still not sure what to call it, in which human societies will eventually converge with natural systems. And so even though we have an artificial society that uses digital technologies, we seem to be converging in the structure, the function, and the behavior of natural, self-emergent, autopoietic, and decentralized organic systems. And I think this is a really interesting, what some would call coincidence, that this is even in existence. Why is human society functioning more organically? What is it about the universe that has these tendencies, nearly these laws, which guide us, or perhaps or within us to express? Not necessarily a teleological law, but an autopoietic law, something kind of written into the fabric of the cosmos, of complex mathematics, chaos mathematics, nonlinear science. I mean, I don't know. I don't even know if that's really a science, nonlinear science. Nonlinear mathematics, I suppose. But at any rate, there's all of these fascinating metaphors, all of these fascinating questions, and it only, for me, raises a statement from the Tao, which is reversal is the movement of the Tao. Although we have tried to escape nature, in the end, what has become of us is nature. What has become of us are the structures of nature. And if you're an esotericist, or if you are a spiritualist, perhaps like Teilhard de Chardin, you might believe that that we are the thinking brain, we are the thinking mind of the earth, and that what we are creating is the organic noosphere, the mental layer of the earth, the biosphere, the geosphere, and the noosphere. Well, I guess that's all part of the biosphere, a complete organism. As the human being, the individual, is below, so we create above in the macrocosm. And so I know it's somewhat anthropocentric to believe that there's ecology below, and then above there's neurology, and there's the mind above and then the body below. But they're together in the sense that, as we know today, with like philosophers like Francisco Varela, Humberto Maturana, and Evan Thompson, that mind is extended into the body. But we still have a brain. So perhaps more natural metaphors like that will come into being once those ideas are hopefully more popularized. and ones that aren't so simply anthropocentric, perhaps, as Teilhard de Chardin's. Another thinker like Sri Aurobindo, who is a mystic, believed that a new form of human being would emerge, and perhaps um, there is a new form of human being emerging today, and the descent of the supramental consciousness, which he believed was this higher form of consciousness, this divine consciousness participating in physical reality in time and space. Does this internet age necessitate any of these things? Absolutely not. These are all technological metaphors. The mystic knows, for instance, and this is from what I gather and what I've read from many different spiritual writers like William Irwin Thompson, who's also a mythologist and historian, and then Matthew Fox, who wrote Creation, Spirituality, and the I think it's called the Search for the Cosmic Christ. What human beings are creating, what we are. I totally lost my train of thought there. Well, that's okay. Oh, here we go. The physical experience, the physical object, like this Seattle's Best Coffee cup, is a symbol, an outward expression of an inward state. Never mistake the technology as the means of transformation or the means of escape. The only healthy metaphor that I've been able to find so far for technology is that it is, like the body, an extension of ourselves. If indeed technology is an extension of nature, and ultimately beginning to work like nature and behave like nature, then the body itself is extended into all of our amplifications. This cup, this computer, my keys, my jeans, my glasses. These are all extensions of my body and my consciousness. My consciousness is not just in my head, but in the whole interaction of parts and differences and the relationship of this ecology of differences. That's mind. Ecology of mind. Gregory Bateson. So if that is our working definition of mind, then mind extends into my whole environment and your whole environment. And so if we see technology as a form of our body, a structure of our body that we can use, that the body uses to express itself, what it is, then like the mystic, maybe it's not so terrible that some of the intuitions at the turn of the last century with Teilhard de Chardin and Sri Aurobindo and other thinkers and Jean Gebser, that the body is a seat of the soul in some ways. The body is not necessarily reducible, or the soul is not reducible to the body alone, but the body itself is an expression of, higher realities, higher worlds, higher forms of existence, other dimensions of being. Plato and Aristotle and the pre-modern society's belief about the nature of the soul and incarnation and so forth. These aren't New Age ideas, these are very ancient ideas. And then, of course, there's Eastern equivalents too. But for the mystic, the body itself it's just an outer, not just, but it is an outer expression of an inward state. And if we believe that, then perhaps the technology, the internet itself, is just an outward expression of an inward state. And if we see it that way, then perhaps, yes, it is connected to these mystical transformations, but it's only the beginning. It's only the beginning in the same way that the body is considered, a sacred being, a sacred form in many traditions. But it's only the beginning of the consciousness, of the state of being which that form chooses to express, which that soul chooses to embody and imbue in the world. So the supramental consciousness, or the new sphere, or omega point from Teilhard, all of those things are not necessitated through technology, but they're potentiated. They're given the potential to be. And you might think, well, at some point, maybe that makes sense, that we would have cyborg extensions of ourselves, being the mutation in consciousness, the shift, the evolution. I know some people believe that evolution itself has sped up through the through technology because it accelerates adaptation to the environment. But it's more ethereal. It's not. It's not hardwired physical changes to the human organism. There's no jumps in DNA. There's minor jumps and minor shifts and things, but no fundamental thing. And there's nothing to make us believe that within the next 25 years we're going to have a massive shift in our DNA and our consciousness is going to change unless, of course, we begin to mess with our DNA artificially or extend ourselves artificially. In the same way that culture is a kind of etherealization of biological evolution, the technological age is a further etherealization, or as Teilhard used to say, intensification of the process. And I think Amber Case, actually, she calls herself a cyborg anthropologist, had a really good, what's it called? She had a really good metaphor for this, and she called it the water cycle of technology. Technology itself used to be very physical. You could tell what a hammer did. You could tell what a sword did. You could tell what a shovel did. Or even just a stone. You could tell somebody hit somebody with that thing or broke stuff off with that. But as time went on, it went from things like the wheel and the hammer and the chisel and the nail and the aqueduct suddenly to things like the cell phone. And you can't. What does it do? I mean, you know what it does. But if you're an anthropologist excavating an ancient civilization, you get these tools, which you can see are physical, and then you get this strange little square block that's almost like the iPhone. It's like the monolith in 2001 Space Odyssey. You don't know what it does. It's etherealizing. Its purposes are more etheric. It's not supposed to be a physical tool to hammer or move stuff. It's more mental. It's more abstract. It's more about the mind. So if we have an etherealization of evolution, perhaps this is just another step in that. And some people believe that. Kevin Kelly believes that. He believes that technology, evolution is taking the next step forward and intensifying itself in information exchange and information transfer from one generation to the next, but it's doing it in a more etheric way through hard drives and so forth, rather than the little storing our genetic code in here. We're now storing genetic code and more through computers. So I don't know. That's one thing. That's one way you could believe that this is happening, through a kind of water cycle of technology where things are etherealizing, and thereby matter itself is etherealizing itself, and that's a kind of esoteric idea. As perhaps for the mystic, these higher etheric worlds, these astral planes, and these higher dimensions are not etherealizing. They're incarnating. They're physicalizing themselves. So then you have Sri Aurobindo's Involution Evolution, and I think I'm going to end this video here, but that's a lot of things that I've been studying, and if you're checking this out, great. I'll have a paper for these. I already have one or two papers, but I'm going to have a paper submitted for a journal in a couple of weeks, perhaps a month or two, probably 2 months, the latest. So the material will be out there. The material is on my blog, Evolutionary Landscapes. Check it out. It's very interesting subject matters, and I would love some input and perhaps advice. And if you want to converse with me about this stuff, then awesome. I realize this video is very long, so I'm going to end it here. And thanks. Have a great day.